Do you have all the presents for Christmas already?
I have to admit, I don't have a single one yet. So it's going to be a hectic couple of days before the celebrations.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the topic fits well to it. So what do you say? So should we start?
Yeah, I think should be okay.
Great. Welcome everyone to our last webinar this year. Christmas coming up, so we have a special topic, a special webinar with us. We're going to dive in some of the myths and fairy tales that we've seen in pricing and revenue management. Some of those that I think fool or enable to do bad decisions. We're going to unpack them a bit like the gifts then on Christmas, and leave you with some interesting insights on those, but of course always also give you some tangible results with it. And as always, I think before we start, a brief overview on who's here today. So Ingo Reinhardt, as always, will lead you through the webinar, co-founder of Binomics, spent most of his career in pricing, has seen a lot of those myths he's going to speak about firsthand, and has also seen what it leads to when you blindly follow those. And myself, I'm moderating the webinar today, and spent the last years in close contact with our clients, enabling them for leveraging the benefits of our solution, and currently leading the product team.
Maybe what do you think about the Christmas hats?
Yeah, I was hoping to kind of just neglect it, but as you mentioned, I think it's worth saying. Yeah, I think we didn't really have a say in that, but I think it fits well on the upcoming times.
Yeah, I think they did okay in the focus group. That's why we kept them.
Always good for a laugh.
Yeah.
Before we jump to the topic, a brief overview on Binomics. As Binomics, we empower our clients to take better pricing and revenue management decisions. We do that with our cloud-based application, which it takes a holistic approach to portfolio optimization, pricing optimization, product and promotion optimization. So what you can do with the solution is, in essence, use it to find very quickly answers to questions like, what's the impact of changing my price? What's the impact if maybe a competitor introduces a new product? And I think one big topic we've seen now be more relevant than ever is how do you react in inflationary environments. The application is based on the virtual customers technology. I'm sure Ingo will mention it later on in the webinar a bit more in depth. And in essence, it helps you really to take better decisions, come faster to decisions. And bottom line, what we see with our clients is they operate much more profitable in terms of taking more profitable revenue management decisions, but also saving, of course, a lot of efforts and costs in coming to those. If you're interested to learn more, of course, we have a lot of material on the website, but feel free to reach out. Now in the webinar that we're going to kickstart now, please feel free to ask your questions just in the chat. We'll have some time at the end to go through all of those. And I would say with that, Ingo, I would leave it to you and give you the stage to dive in.
Yeah, thanks, Anton, for the introduction. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining this last webinar of this year before we go into the Christmas season. We have lots of things coming up next year, so we're looking forward to coming back. But today's, I think we always did this, and we did something like this before Halloween, pricing horror stories, which where we try to take a bit of a funny view on the field, and today's, I would say, something like that. Fairy tales, things that we come across within the field and that we want to discuss. Of course, as Anton said, we're happy to discuss. If you have any questions or see things differently from how we're showing these things, then please put it in the comments. We're very happy to discuss and also have different viewpoints on these. So let's start right into it. And I think the we want to have on the field is a bit different from what many others are doing. If you Google pricing myth, you will come up with many of the things or some of the things that we have on the slide here. So probably everyone who's involved in pricing has their own list. They include things like costs don't matter in pricing, lots of things that are probably not fully right. And we want to show our take on the topics and also maybe correct some of these myths moving forward. And to do so, let's dive right into it. It's probably something that most of you have seen so often, and I've seen this quite a lot. When people say that or want to say that pricing is important, they show something like this slide here, where they say, okay, what's the impact of different things you can do on your bottom line in the company? And the idea is essentially what's the impact of a 1% improvement of price? What's the impact of an improvement of 1% in cost? What's the impact of a volume improvement? And what's the impact of fixed cost improvement? And what's underneath that is typically a profit function, where you have profit is essentially your revenue minus your variable cost minus your fixed cost. And when you do that with typical margins and cost and so on, and I think McKinsey did a very large study on this with realistic data, what comes out is that if you have a 1% improvement in your pricing, that increases your EBITDA by about 6%. Variable cost 3.8, volume increase of 1% produces an EBITDA improvement of 2.1, and a fixed cost improvement or fixed cost reduction by 1%, typically 1.1 improvement in EBITDA. And this is fine, but what's often not very transparent in these calculations is that they always assume a price elasticity of 0. So essentially what they do is, and to produce this type of chart, is that they assume you can increase the price by 1% and you don't lose any sales because of it. And that this is what produces this chart. If you want to do this realistically, it's a bit more tricky because, of course, as we all know, if your pricing is good or not depends a lot on how customers react to the price change. So in this computation, the assumption is, in everything that I've seen, always that there is no price elasticity, so you can always increase the price by 1% and nothing happens to your sales. And if pricing was that easy, then our jobs, of course, were much simpler, but it isn't. So, and I think this is one of the key pricing myths, and I've seen this so many times, and it's a bit too simplistic to assume that there's no reaction in pricing. Of course, we all know pricing is super important, has a large impact, immediately affects top and bottom line, but it's not as simple as this comparison here typically suggests. So this was the warm up. Let's go into the topic, and I think, as always, it makes sense to, when we talk about myth, to define what we mean by it. So a myth is typically an ancient story or set of stories, especially explaining the early history of a group of people or about natural events and facts. And I think that's a quite fitting definition for all the stories that we'll be talking about. In terms of pricing, I think as a field, we're somewhat in an early stage, and at a stage where, and this is also where we see ourselves, where we're moving from like a world where there are many simple or simplistic concepts like price elasticity and others, and we're now moving into a more technology-based world where we have a much better understanding of the dynamics in markets and how to properly work with these different pricing concepts. So what we want to talk about today are essentially 4 different areas, or 4 different myths that we want to discuss. I think the first myth, and these are, I would say, when I said in the 2 slides ago, there are many myths that pricing professionals see in maybe non-professionals. And what we want to do is we want to discuss the myth that many pricing professionals have and tell each other. And those are the things we want to address here, just in a sense to put pricing on the next level. So the first one is what we often hear is costs do not matter in pricing, something that many consultants, for example, tell their clients. The second one is, and very much related to the first one, pricing is all about the customer. So you need to understand the value to the customer. Third myth that we come across quite often, maybe most of all of these that we see here, is price elasticity is a number. So we often see that many people use lists of price elasticity. Price elasticity is -1, -2, -3, and then that's used to compute the reaction in demand to a price change. And the fourth myth is essentially covers the field of behavioral economics or behavioral pricing. And what we often see is that there are many tales or anecdotes that circulate, and they are essentially applied one-to-one in each situation. So everyone, for example, knows the example with the 3 wine bottles, where you introduce a very expensive wine bottle to make the other 2 look more reasonably priced. And the problem with that is that it assumes that these kind of anecdotes can be applied equally well in different situations, but the way they work is very context specific, and this is something we want to address here. So let's dig into it. The first one is costs do not matter in pricing, and as I think many of us have seen now with in the inflationary environment, with costs going up, with COGS going up as a basis for many prices, we see that that's not fully true. And if your costs do increase, it almost always is necessary to also increase prices. And this is, if you just look at the map underneath this becomes very transparent. So for example, if in a very simple case, we have a linear demand function as we have here on the left side, and then we are currently priced in the profit optimum, and we see, and this is something that is very easy to demonstrate here on the right side, is that the optimal price under a linear demand function, of course, depends on C. C here is the cost, so it's the half of the costs, and then the second term depends on the slope and the intercept here of the linear demand function. And typically what that means is, if you are in a world where you have a linear demand, that you pass on half of the absolute price of the absolute cost increase. So for example, in this example, you are at a price here with a price elasticity of -2, your costs are 100, then your optimal price is 200. And if your costs increase from 100 to 110, then the optimal price is the optimal price increase is 5%. And this, of course, depends a lot on the type of the demand function. If, for example, the demand is not linear but exponential, then what happens is that the optimal price increase would be not 5 euros, but if you have an exponential demand function, you need to keep the margin the same. That means that you would increase the price so that the margin is the same. And if you have then a cost increase from 100 to 110, your price should go from 200 to 220. All right, so that was the first one. Oh, Anton, are you already answering your all the questions? I think I see lots of stuff going on in the chat.
A lot of traffic, and maybe a claim again. We'll have some time at the end to answer those questions, and yes, the recording will be shared afterwards.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so the second one, I think related to the first one on cost, is that pricing is all about value to the customer. And I think these first two myths are typically closely related. People say, okay, pricing is not about cost, it's only about what the product is worth to the customer. But the difficult part in this is, which customer do you actually mean? So particularly if you're selling in a B2C environment to many shoppers, for example, you see that and indicated here on the right side by this demand function, is that essentially everyone has a different willingness to pay or attributes a different value to a product. And it's not clear which one is meant. And what really happens if you increase the price, you will lose some of these customers. And this, of course, depends on the slope and the price elasticity. But there's, of course, a different value that every customer attributes to the product. And in reality, or very often in analyses that we've seen, this is attributed, or this is captured in something like customer segments, as we see here on the right side, is that there are different types of customers or buyer personas. There's the price sensitive one, there's the one who is shopping for value, certain different types of customer segments. But in reality, if you ever seen like the raw data that's underneath such a customer segmentation, it looks a lot like what you see here on the left side. So most data that if you look at if you, for example, do a conjoint analysis or other things, looks very much like the one here on the left side. And then with lots of simplifications, it's turned into something like here that sounds plausible on the right side, but what's really going on underneath looks a lot more like what you see here on the left side. So these are all strong simplifications to be able to tell these anecdotes or myths. I think another one closely related to this one is the idea of price differentiation, or the benefit that comes from price differentiation, typically within a simple example. So what you have here on the left side, again, we have some like linear demand here, and we have a profit optimal price if everyone buys at the same price of $100. And let's say at these $100, we sell 1,000 units. So with costs of 50, we make a profit of 50,000 here. And if, however, we manage to sell to each customer at their maximum value, so we not only get the square, but we get the triangle here underneath the demand function, then what happens is that you actually manage to double the profit here. So the area under the triangle here is 100,000. So if you manage to hit the profit, the maximal willingness to pay of each one of these, you double your profit. And this is typically what's promoted as the benefit of price differentiation. But the challenge, and what's really the difficult part, is that you actually need to be able to determine everyone's maximum willingness to pay. And if you do that, of course, you can double your profit. But if you are off just a little bit, you might do worse than if you only have a single price. And if you do the math and compute it out, it's somewhere around, you need about a correlation of 0.95. So it's really, really strong correlation between the actual willingness to pay of every person and what you predict it to be. So essentially, if you're aiming for full price differentiation, as in this extreme example, you have to almost know exactly what everyone's willing to pay. And if you don't, if your expectation and reality are off by less than or more than 5% here, then you are worse than where you would be if you just work with a single price. So in theory, price differentiation is a very good idea if you're able to implement it. But if you're just not almost fully precise, you're doing worse than you would do with a single price. So it can work. Theoretically, it does work, but in practice, it's super, super difficult. And for most companies, not the best way. Of course, there are many steps in between, but going for this full price differentiation is a really, really difficult thing. And we're still ignoring like all the problems that come if you charge different prices to different people, and they notice that they pay different prices for the same thing. So really difficult. So the myth is price differentiation is always the right answer. The truth is that it can be, but it's really, really difficult. The other one, so I think it's number 3, if I counted correctly, is on price elasticities. And as we said before, typically in almost all cases, you see that, or we see that people use a single number to measure a product's price sensitivity. So say, okay, this product is highly sensitive, or customers for a certain product are highly sensitive. Therefore, the price elasticity is, let's say, -4, and then there's another product where customers are less price sensitive, and the elasticity is -1, for example. This is not really how reality works. So again, and we're always using the linear demand function just because it's, I would say, the simplest one to demonstrate. You see that if you go from a price of 0 to whatever the maximum price is for that product, the elasticity takes all values between 0 and -infinity. So it's really difficult to say what this product's price elasticity is. And it's kind of like that with almost every product, that it can take every value along between 0 and -infinity. So saying the price elasticity of this product is X hardly makes sense in most situations, because it can take all kinds of values. And this is not just a theoretical challenge, it's something real. For example, if you typically, and we looked at many cases when you have something like a price elasticity of -2, you increase the price by 10%, you go to something like 2.5 to 3. And if you look at what the price elasticity implies on the optimal price or the optimal margin, that can have a massive impact on where the optimal price is for that product. So just taking a single number is too simple, and it always makes sense to take a look at the full demand function and also how that reacts to other changes in the market, for example, competitive price changes. The last one we want to address today is concerned with with behavior pricing. And I think a very common example that many face in their working life are things like price thresholds. And if you look at survey data, or you run different types of surveys on price thresholds, you will typically find that they're super relevant. So here, the white line we have in the graph is what we got from a survey. So it was some snack, and you see that the demand function here, so it's the percent of customers who, or the respondents in the survey, who said they would buy that snack at different prices. You see that it goes down with price, which makes sense. And then there's this large jump as you go from 90 cents to €1. And this is about a drop in 35% in sales you would have as you cross the price threshold here. And then it goes on a little bit slower. But there's a massive price threshold here in the middle. And we compared that with the product's real data, and each dot here are the weekly sales, corrected for seasonality and other effects. But you see that if you do the analysis, there is a price threshold, but it's much, much weaker than is suggested by the survey. And the difference is, if you ask people in a survey just about this one product, they essentially answer the question, will I buy this product or no product at all? Whereas in reality, particularly if they are standing in front of a shelf with many alternative products, they will rather answer the question, will I buy this or something else? So the price threshold is much, much less relevant than in the case where there's only one product to focus on. And this is really important for real life decisions. So if you are offering your products in the environment where there are many alternatives, then a price threshold is much, much less important than when customers only have to choose between this product and no product at all, or between this product and a much smaller set of alternatives. So this really matters, what the impact, what the environment is. And you have the same things with preference for the middle option, or like in the wine example that I mentioned in the beginning, where you have essentially like an expensive decoy product to raise people's willingness to pay for cheaper products. all of these things depend on the context. And if you properly want to make use of these tools or insights, you need to be able to have something that allows you to put these insights into context so you can make the proper prediction on how these effects work out in reality and in typically a different environment than like the clean laboratory environment where surveys are conducted. So, and this is essentially, incidentally, I would say, the mission we're on, that we are trying to get from, as we said, from a world where many of the concepts we have in pricing, like elasticities, customer segments, value pricing, are really, as we would say, oversimplifying reality to some extent. And we want to move more to a world where we use the proper technology to answer the right questions and be able to put these things into proper context. And let me just, I think, Anton, we still have a minute.
Yeah, I think it's worth spending another.
Let me just share an example of what I mean. You see my browser?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so let's just have 1 minute and look at a very simple example, and it's also called simple example here. So a very honest name. So there are two products in here. So we have apples and we have pears, and they cost 50 cents each, have as costs. And we have a price currently of 130 for each. Willingness to pay, I think, is pretty much the same for both products. And what I said is you need to put them into the offer into the right environment. And also we talked about whether costs matter. We talked about whether willingness to pay matters, that price elasticity is just a single number, and so on. And essentially what we see as the alternative is a world, and this is essentially the technology that we develop. So we call the virtual shopper or virtual customer. And the idea is that we replicate real customers' preferences and let them choose between different products if there's more than one product offered. And this really brings together all the different ideas that there are available in pricing. So for example, we have here these two products. If I increase the price of one of them 10 cents, then it loses sales. The other product gains a few of them, and some will not buy anything at all anymore. And with something like this, you essentially are in a position to model much more naturally what's really going on in the market. So you have, as we had before here, these demand functions for the two products. You can look at revenue, profit, and of course, and you can look at price elasticity. As we said before, it's not a single number. Price elasticities differ along the whole way. And if you, for example, so this is us, we're selling apples, our competitor, the red one here, is selling pears, and currently he's not in the profit optimum, neither are we, and maybe he thinks I can reduce my price to be profit optimal, goes here. And what happens to us, of course, is that we lose profit in this case, and maybe we want to improve ours as well. So we go to our optimum, which puts the other one below the optimum, and the other one then can increase. And then we see that at some point we're at a stage where no one can improve anymore. Of course, we know these equilibria exist. It's the Nash equilibrium in this case. And so these things are all available. This, of course, is a very simple example, but it highlights that the different myth that we addressed. So costs matter. Price elasticity is different, and of course you also depend on many other things. In this case here, the competitor price and reaction to optimize your profit, and of course also your revenue is your revenue optimum is a different price than your profit optimum. So all of these things can be brought together using the proper technology, and this is, I think, what we are working on to resolve these myths and bring the field to the next stage. And with that, come back to the presentation. I think we're almost at the end of the time, but
spot on, I would say.
Will you wrap it up?
Yeah, I think before we wrap it up, one question I'd like to give room here. And this is focused on the virtual customer technology. So we have someone asking, how do your virtual customers behave in different countries, sectors, or time when you simulate a price change? I think this is an important one. Maybe you can share a short answer on that.
So how they react is probably too difficult.
So I think
that depends on lots of things. Maybe we can answer this afterwards in written, because it's going to be too long for the last minute here.
Yeah. Great. Then, yeah, let's maybe close off with an outlook. If you go maybe 2 slides further. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the last webinar of this year. We'll be back on January 13th with the next webinar on deciding and measuring the right KPIs. And you find the sign up on the website. We'll follow up after this webinar with an individual invitation. And yeah, if we don't hear or speak before Christmas and the new year, we wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Have a good start in the next year. And thanks for joining. And we're happy to see you then again in the next year. Yeah, same from my side. Thanks, Paul, for the intro. Always a pleasure. And to all of you for attending our webinars. It was great fun for us. Also, your feedback, much appreciated. We're looking forward to the coming back next year. We have what we don't yet have on the slides, other things coming up. We want to introduce a new format where we talk to experts within the field and try, if we get more insights this way, to add to what we're already doing. If you have any ideas, suggestions, always open on topics we should cover. If you should do something differently. And with that, have a great end of the year, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year.